So let's start with the camera's ability to adjust focal length. So on my camera, there's 3 lenses. So, you know, a lot of cameras now have at least 2 that are already built in. And so, you know, by default, it starts with 1x. So if I go to 0.5, it's going to be significantly more wide angle, right? So it's got a wider field of view. And when we have a wider field of view, we also end up with shallower depth of field. Now, I'm really far away from the subject, so we probably have pretty much everything in focus. And again, if I switch back to 1, now it's going to pull in a little bit tighter. If I was to click on the 2, then it will get in even tighter as well, right? And then, you know, as it starts to crop in, I may need to readjust my framing or composition depending on what I want to focus on, right? Is it really more about these 2 chairs and the shadows, you know, or is it really about like the texture and the detail of these little, the little shadows of the light, you know, that start to bounce off of there? Is it more about that, right? And that's a decision. It's an aesthetic decision. Now, if I still wanted the whole thing, you know, I could still pull back further and you know, have more of a similar framing, even though I've still had increased my focal length. So, you know, the camera has those built-in options. Now, that is different than also like pinching and zooming. So let's say I did want to keep this as my main subject. So I could get in tighter, right? So if on the iPhone, if I click and hold, I have this option to zoom in, right? Now I can zoom further, but what's starting to happen is it's no longer just using the zoom of the lenses. It's actually cropping in, so the quality is going to start to deteriorate as I start to go in there. Now I might be able to go, well, now I just want this one with the shadow, right? So instead of probably zooming in further than the 2, what I would probably do is actually physically move in and push in so that I can really, you know, get in tighter if I wanted to. Now, what we want to be able to look at is depth of field, right? So let's move in a little bit closer and give ourselves, because there's no depth right now, there's just the wall, you know, and we hit that wall and that's all that we have. So what we need is there to be some distance where it can recede into distance. So let's move and change our angle a little bit. So I like the way that maybe like the sun's kind of reflecting off of this first chair. So I'm going to make that like my main subject, and then I'm going to try to keep kind of that wall and some of the other part of the, you know, the other chair here back in the distance as well. Just a little bit. Just flare it up. All right. So let's go ahead and switch over. Let's go to Yamera, because that way we can control our focus a little more. So again, I'm going to go exposure, and let's lock the exposure. And, you know, I want to make sure that I can see this pretty well without blowing out that highlight. So let's go maybe there. And then let's go to focus, and I'm going to lock the focus. And I want this, you know, to be pretty sharp in this front edge of that chair. So, you know, we're not all the way pushed in, but we're pretty close, right? And so, oops. All right, so now I've got my shot kind of composed the way that I want it. And, you know, if I just go ahead and take a picture, then, you know, I've got a pretty good shallow depth of field already. And again, in Yamera, if I click on the little camera at the top here, it gives me an option, and I'm on my telephoto. So if I went to just back camera, that would be just kind of the standard normal focal length, right? And we can see, you know, even though I'm pretty close, that background's pretty sharp already, right? And let's just double check our focus, you know, focus, we can get that front edge. You know, so if I get that front edge there, you know, it's got a little more shallower depth of field. And again, I can push in, but instead we want to do it with focal length. So if I have it built into my camera, do that. Otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and get out our lens really quick. So I'm on the standard lens on the camera currently. And so for this, what we want to use right now is the telephoto lens. This is because our focus is set. So I'm gonna go ahead and just clip that directly on, and I'm on my normal lens, so I'm gonna go ahead and clip this on here. And you can see that pulls in a little bit tighter, right? Because that's how far away it was before. And probably be a good idea to take your case off. My case is on right now, so it's also causing a little bit more of a blur, not quite getting on there quite as tight. And again, I can double check my focus just in case it shifted a little bit. I can pull it into that front edge over there. And, again, now I'm getting a shallower depth of field just because I've got that extra lens on there. Now, I do have the ability to also use my telephoto lens with the telephoto, which also would create a little bit more shallower depth of field as well. So you're just going to need to kind of play around with those and experiment, on how you can arrange and try to get that shallower depth of field based on which focal length you're using. Now, if we wanted to go in the other direction, we do have another option, which is the lens that it comes with on the kit automatically. Fisheye, right? So this one's super wide angle. It's like 180 degrees. So if we wanted to, we could clip on this one as well. Again, we're on our standard lens. It's definitely going to have some vignette that goes around there, meaning that kind of we're going to see, no matter what we do, we're going to see that black along there. And again, we can adjust our focus so we can get that in place, but that gives a totally different perspective. It's not going to help us with our shallow depth of field, but it is kind of an interesting effect. So if we want to go for something a little more unique, we can definitely kind of play around with the fisheye. So another lens that's worth taking a look at is this one here. It says radial filter, and what it does is, I don't know if we can catch it in the light, but you can kind of see there's like a clear spot to it kind of in the center, and then there's kind of like a little angle to it. So what it's going to do is, let me go ahead and get it clipped on. And then what it does is there's like a sweet spot, right? So there's an area where it's kind of got sharp focus. So let's turn it down towards the light, because we'll get kind of some of that. So it's almost a magic hour. Sun's about to set in just a little bit. It's about to dip behind those buildings in just a minute. But, as I start to rotate this lens, it kind of has, again, it's got that sweet spot of where the focus is, so if I want that sweet spot over there, so now that chair is really picking up that light. But then I also want kind of that sunset in the background. It kind of gives me this dreamy effect. If a person was sitting there or something, we could create kind of a nice, dreamy sort of a feeling to it. So let's take a picture there with our radial filter. Yeah, so that's what that one does. So this one here is called the flow filter. And so it kind of does a similar effect. It's got like a little different type of a sweet spot. So let's go ahead and see what its effect is. Yeah, we're starting to lose our light just a little bit, at least from where we're at with the sunset. So again, and then again, just like before, it'll rotate and give us different effects, as it, again, if I'm looking for that sweet spot, I can kind of find that there. Again, I can go in here with my focus, let's lock it, get it so it's sharp there. I can even play with my exposure a little bit, lock that. Want that sunset to come out nice. There we go. So again, it kind of gives us that really selective focus if we want something like that, that gives us more of like a dreamy effect. That was without. So now if we really want to get some shallow depth of field, you might want to experiment with this one. Now this one actually is two lenses in one. So the top one says wide and the bottom one says macro. So what we might want to actually do is remove that top wide angle one and just leave on that bottom one that says macro. Now, what that means is you're going to have to get super close to whatever your subject is. But let's take a quick look what that looks like. So there it is with just the one on there. And I'm going to go ahead and get that clipped into place. Now it's going to just really look blurry for right now. Get it centered. And my focus is going to be all the way as close as it'll go. And So we're gonna just lean in here into some of this rust maybe. So you can see we're getting closer, closer, closer. So once I'm like almost leaning up against it, but once I get that close, you know, it can get into focus. And let's just play with our exposure just a little bit maybe. But you can see the background, you know, is really, really soft. But, you know, it's got limited uses, right? I'm not going to be able to use this for everything. But there might be a time where we really want to get in there. Maybe it's some nature or something like that. And we really want to be able to see those details. And so, you know, I'm like half of an inch, if that, from that chair, just so that we can kind of see those details and get some really soft. I mean, it's dropping off in half of an inch, something like that, because there's not very much space. So just another thing to kind of play around with. So the next lens that I want to show you is one. It says CPL mobile phone lens. So CPL is circular polarizing lens. And so what it's going to do is it's going to help minimize reflections, and then also it's going to allow us to be able to darken the sky. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what that looks like when we use the CPL filter. So here we've got a kind of a window shot, and what we're going to be doing with the polarizing filter is just clip it onto our lens and up in the front, and make sure that we're getting it right there in the middle. And so what we do is on the front part, it has like a rotation. So as I rotate it in one direction, it allows the reflection to show, and another time it allows the reflection to disappear so that I can see into it. So architectural photographers will use things like this if they want to be able to see inside to the interior of the space. And again, I'll go ahead and take a picture here, and then we'll dial in those reflections and take another picture. There we go. So that's what our polarizing filter, our CPL one's going to do.